Hello wise people, you are listening to the Wise Words Book Club, where we review some of our favourite non-fiction books and we provide you with their key ideas. Not only that, but we teach you how to apply them to the real world and how to benefit from them. If you like what you hear, make sure you click that sexy little follow button and head on over to our website wisewords.blog or our Instagram wisewordsblog, where we upload daily content on all your favourite books. So, without further ado, let's get started.
So, should we begin with 12 Rules for Life Part 2?
Yep.
And we are...
So, I think last time we went up from, we did 1 to 5. So now we'll be doing 6 to 12. So our first one on the list is set your house in order before you criticize the world. Do you want to start us off?
Yeah, to be honest, this chapter in particular, I've got notes about before you criticize the world. He basically was talking about how we should look internally first before we criticize external problems. Yeah. So I think his way of saying it is we're all kind of flawed in many different ways, right? And a lot of people tend to criticize outwardly to other people and put responsibility on external things rather than looking to themselves and seeing what they can fix themselves first, if that makes sense.
Shift the problem.
And it's really interesting because not reading specifically from this book, but even reading that book I was telling you about, like Evil or whatever, a lot of that sort of behavior in terms of evil behavior, for example, comes about from this idea of shifting blame onto other people and, basically blaming external things for your own suffering, or blaming external things for the reason why you're not where you want to be. Yeah. And his point in this sort of chapter was exploring the idea that, like, we should take more responsibility ourselves, because when you start blaming other people, the logic eventually will get to the point where it's like, well, the only way you can get to the situation you want to have, if somebody else is stopping you, is to get rid of them or to cause them some harm or to get in a fight or whatever. And there's not, like, as you can see from the internet, like, there's no there's a fair share of trolls online, right? Yeah. And this is kind of that sort of thing. It's like they're very quick to criticize others and they're not very quick to look at themselves. Yeah. So for me, one of the things I got out of it was this idea of, like, fixing your life and trying to look at your life and look at the problems that you have that reoccur and fixing them first before you go along trying to give other people advice or trying to fix other people. But I don't know what you got from this.
Yeah, no, I'm the same. I think, like, to jump right into it, I think it's quite interesting when you consider that, problems that we come across are usually, like, multifactorial. There's so many reasons for why it's occurring. It's not just, like, things aren't usually just cause and effect, so binary, like one thing causes this. And I think what's interesting is, when we come across a problem, it's very easy to not approach it and to try and, like you said, push it somewhere else. Yeah. And I've been talking about this a lot recently, actually, in regards to, tackling problems head on, and how, usually you used to have, like, before social media and technology and all of that, you used to have this ability to, you either overcome it and you get stronger and more tolerant of that problem and can know how, like, you acquire the tools to, solve it next time, or you let it, like, take advantage of you and, you fall down, you go down to hell, as Jordan Peterson talks about it. And I think now you have a third option, because you can push it, you can blame it, because before, when you weren't interconnected with the whole of the world, you weren't sure whether your problem was just yours or whether other people had the problem. And now with social media, it shines a light on every possible problem. So now that, in the grand scheme of things, there's 7 billion people on the world. Of course, they're going to have, there's going to be someone with the same problem. But now there's, like, a group identity around that problem. Okay, so now instead of either tackling it or, like, letting it take advantage of you, you've now got this third option, which is, to push it, to blame it somewhere else, because you can now be like, oh, well, it's not just me. Other people have it as well. Yeah. And so then
it's interesting because they all come together and they come up with a reason as a group, and it reinforces the reason even if it's not true, right?
And
this is where the conspiratorial thinking is coming. I think this is where a lot of the conspiratorial thinking is coming from at the moment. Don't get me wrong, but I'm so on the fence with this because like at the moment there seems to be binary sides around this COVID thing. It's either so real and so dangerous that you're a douche or you're a bad person for not believing in it, or you're the opposite and it's all about the government trying to take control. And spectrum. Yeah, do you get what I mean? It's either or. There's no like middle ground where it might be a bit of both.
Well, I find it really hard
to navigate the situation at the moment because people are like, it's almost they're pitching sides again. But this is what happens, like you said, when you blame somebody, you have a problem, you coalesce with a load of people who have the same problem. You then brainstorm what the answer is or the cause behind it, and then once you settle on the answer, everything that comes into your mind is all about that answer. If you kind of get me.
Well, this is it, and I think what's so interesting is when you start associating yourself as part of this group that has this problem, okay, and the problem might be justified, okay, I'm not saying anything about that, but your problem then becomes the most important problem. So if someone else has a problem, then there's this feud to be like, well, my problem's worse than yours. And then you end up having this inability to almost trust other people because you're at conflict with everyone. Just because they don't have your problem doesn't mean that they can't understand you and all this. So then you have that's why, like we're just saying, such a binary point of view. And you've got Brexit and you've got the 50-50, in America for Trump and Hillary, all those kinds of things. And you're starting to see such a divide because people think that their problem is more important than the others and that they shouldn't hear out the other person's problem. Oh, yeah. So to bring this back to this chapter, I think, for instance, I remember listening to Sam Harris talk about I think it was Black Lives Matter. And it was really interesting. He was saying that, let's say two people are walking through a airport security, okay? And the airport security guard is having a fucking shit day and he's like, being a bit of an asshole. Now, a white guy goes through the airport security and the guy gives him attitude. And so you think, okay, well, that guy's just a bit of an asshole. A black guy goes through it, and you can't determine whether it was him being an arsehole or him doing it because he's racist, because it's hard to pinpoint. And so my point being that a problem is made up of more than just one thing.
Yes.
It's like how much percentage does something play a factor in?
Yeah.
And so I think in this kind of rule, set your house in order before you criticize the world.
Yeah.
I think his kind of point is you can't blame other things until you know that you've sorted all your problems out first.
Yeah, because or how you contributed to the problem yourself.
Well, this is exactly it, because you don't know how much percentage that thing is playing a problem until you know how much of a percentage you yourself are not solving.
Sure. I think it specifically works well for relationships as well. For if you're having arguments with your partner, how much of it is actually your partner, how much of it is yourself? Because it does, that old phrase, it takes two to tango. I'm a big believer in that. Exactly. What can you take responsibility for within that problem that you're causing some of it yourself?
Yeah.
But yeah, no, it was. I think that is exactly what he was kind of talking about in that chapter, and that was his main point almost. I mean, for me, that's all I got. That was I think what's quite interesting about most of this book as well, which is kind of what I was speaking to you before, is this point even here about fixing and the problem and sort of sorting out your own problems first links in with stuff like be precise in your speech later, if you get me, because being precise in your speech is literally the same thing. It's being precise. Where is the problem? Where have you contributed? It's being precise, if you kind of get me. So we'll get more into that in a second. I think, am I right to think one of the next one is pursue what is meaningful and not what's expedient?
Yeah, exactly.
This one for me is just pretty fucking self-explanatory. It's he's basically saying here, look for the long term, don't look for the short term. Almost, this literally the whole chapter is about. It was linking it back to the Bible, wasn't it? And it was talking about how meaning, you can only have meaning in your life when you regulate impulses and you sacrifice now for the future. So if we just followed our impulses at a whim consistently, your life wouldn't have meaning because you're not aiming for something. So his point is, you need to have a vision for the future, or a state which you're aiming for, which requires you to do like a sacrifice now, or to constrain your action to get somewhere. Therefore, all meaning comes from this pursuing of a greater ideal. So if you don't have a vision of a better future, and you're just going through your sort of, you're going through the motions at a whim to your impulses. Like every time you fancy, eating a bit of sugar, you have some sugar. Or every time you fancy having a drink, you have a drink. Your life doesn't have meaning because you're giving way to all these quick and easy pleasures almost. And his point is,
exactly,
all good and all meaningful actions come from in your life from sacrifice. So sacrificing the time now to develop a better self, which effectively what university was meant to be, this idea of sacrificing your now to learn more and become better. But the whole chapter is literally, it can be summed up like that. I don't know if you got anything extra.
I think it's interesting because I think it's a bit of a spectrum, because you can't give up everything in the present just for the future, and you can't just indulge in everything now for you to have no future. Do you get what I mean? And I think there's a moderation, and I think what's interesting is the whole picture is the present and the future. And I think I made a note here. It was you have the whole picture is made up of both the present and the future, and you add them both together and then try to make the best decision. So you have to make a sacrifice, and it's what the best outcome is. And so it's you looking at both of them to try and figure out, well, where's the optimal point? How much do I sacrifice to get a good amount of in the future? And I think what's interesting is he was kind of talking about, sometimes we sacrifice things and it doesn't work out, and it's, we don't get the result we wanted, and this can lead us astray because it doesn't pay off to our expectations, and so it makes us less likely to sacrifice next time or to try as hard, because we think, well, we tried hard last time and we didn't get the benefits that we wanted. And so then over time we become less likely to sacrifice, or we don't try as much, and it's a negative cycle that keeps going on. So we become more and more kind of impulsive and think less about the future, and impulsivity leads to pleasure, and pleasure is to do with addictions and drugs, alcohol, all these kinds of things.
I guess the argument you could say is pleasure is one of those things that could take control of you in a way, in the sense that these neural circuits, the whole point of the pleasure mechanism is to reinforce a particular behavior, right, in my head. If you look at the biology behind the whole feeling of satisfaction and pleasure is to reinforce and make you do something again, just like pain. The reason why we feel pain is to stop us from doing something again, because it's potentially dangerous for us. Therefore, if you're always pursuing pleasure, you are ingraining these pleasure sort of behavior routines. I think it's probably the best way of thinking about it. Every time you for example, every time I pick up this, it's quite a nice sugary drink. It's ginger beer, right? I've just hit the pleasure circuit, right? And I have chocolate in that fridge as well. I'm no bloody saint.
Of course, you fucking do.
But yeah, exactly. What I'm saying is, when it's there, I'm almost out of control, in the sense that I will say to myself, I don't want it, and then I'll think about it, and then I'll think about the pleasure that's going to give me. I almost project my body. This is the incentive reward system. I think about the pleasure, and that's the cue in itself to then go and get it, the anticipation back to the dopamine, and I go pick it up. And so this is the point. I feel the more you get into it, the harder it is to get off.
Well, this is it.
And this is the point. You lose control if you keep simultaneously taking pleasure. The whole point is, if you make sacrifices to the future, you actually improve your ability to take more sacrifices, because you prove to yourself you can do it as well.
And what's interesting to relating it to your point earlier on about the control heuristic is that when we do these things that we like, that are pleasurable, the consequences are a lag effect, so we don't experience them right then and there. If we eat a chocolate bar now, we don't suddenly see us putting on fat, but we do if we do this a lot over time. And I think that's being able to regulate yourself and your impulses, and being able to choose when you can actually do it and whether it's beneficial for your future as well. It's this, looking at this on a bigger note, it's you look at the environment and the economy. Both are crucial. Both are the economy affects you firsthand. We all have money, and it all affects us on a day-to-day basis, whereas the environment is a long-term thing and will affect us in the future. So you have to make decisions that are based on both. You know, they have to coexist with each other. The future and the present have to coexist with each other, because then you can make the best kind of decision.
I think you can almost, like, it's really interesting about that as well, because you can almost see your current present is the balance you've been pursuing in the future. Oh, sorry, what I mean is, in the past. So the balance that you've been operating at in terms of future, present, has led to your current present, if you kind of get me. The way you've been behaving in the past has led to where you stand right now. And if you don't edit it, you're going to keep where you are almost. Like, you're always in a state of, like, how much pleasure are you taking? How much are you like, what's the word? How much pleasure are you having? How much pleasure are you staving off? I guess you could put it. What I mean is, the current situation you are now is based on that sort of balance that you've had in the past. In multiple areas, whether it's health, whether it's wealth, whether it's friendship, relationships, etc. How much have you invested in it in the past? Means, like, in the future. If you kind of get me? You're always, the current present is the results of, what's that saying? The current harvest is the plenty of the seeds from the past. I could butcher that. You know what I mean? It's something to do with, like, the current harvest is from the seeds of the past, right? It doesn't happen immediately. So where you are right now is a result of
built up over time.
Yeah, exactly. And obviously then, I think his main point here is, it's finding that sweet spot, like you said, and trying to. I think one of the things I thought was interesting was he had this, like, meta. That's it. If you aim at being a better human being in general, if you aim at just being better in every single aspect of your life will always have meaning.
Yeah. Well,
and that was like exactly. A better point. Like, I mean, obviously there's the discussion of what's better. But the point is, if you're always looking to improve in all aspects of your life, you'll always be feeling progress, and you always find meaning, because everything you do is contributing for this better. Yeah. If that makes sense. Everything you do, if you're acting to be better, technically contributes to that better self.
Yeah.
Which is interesting. But apart from that, mate, I'm trying to think what else I could rattle off from that. But that's all that I got from it. It was almost like a very, like, it's a classic kind of get it. And it's just his way of explaining it. It was very biblical as well.
And I think, like, you know, it becomes a habit in itself to try and ingrain the best kind of decision making into, like, after considering the future and the present. You know, if you can hit that optimal point and you ingrain that as, like, part of a habit, then it's like, you know, you're staying, I don't know, in a good place, rather than, like, fluctuating from one to the other, like, you know, indulging for, like, we all do this where, you know, we'll indulge for a whole week. And then we'll be like, oh yeah, you drink beers and eat shit food, and then be like, okay, I'm gonna, like, you know, be really good for 3 months, and then we go back and we just do it again. It's like dry Jan is like a perfect example where, like, you know, people would justify it to themselves to be like, oh, I'm not gonna drink for a month, and then you fucking compensate by drinking loads afterwards.
Well, I'll let you know how that goes for me, because I've just started drinking the 0% alcohol beers, and I'm actually quite enjoying them.
Mate, some of them are actually get
genuinely good, mate. Yeah. Genuinely. I had some, like, blonde ones, and they taste like Leffe. I don't know if you like Leffe beers, but so I'm enjoying them so far, like, genuinely. And also, weirdly, on that note, it hits the spot. So, like, a bit like non-caffeinated coffees for me. Yeah. My body's so used to, like, this just reminds me, of the whole idea that perception isn't just the actual substance; it's the whole routine and the smells and everything. Your body expects it. So, for example, I drank, like, these beers, and it hits that spot. Like, okay, I fancy a beer, and I'll have that, like, 0% alcohol beer, and I've actually quenched it, if that makes sense. I don't feel the need to have another beer. It's fucking great. And it's the same with decaffeinated coffee. I'll have a decaffeinated coffee at, like, 7 o'clock in the evening, and I've got rid of that sort of craving. And, like, this is kind of why I understand why, I guess, nicotine's slightly different, because obviously it actually is the addictive part of it. But, like, this idea that you can
wean yourself off it.
Wean yourself off by trying to find a routine which still hits the spot.
But exactly. Like, I go for, like, I get, like, maybe drink, like, 1 coffee a day or something, but it's not so much the coffee that I enjoy. It's the kind of getting out of the house, going for a walk, and then I'm in my, like, productive state. That's kind of what it initiates. So, like, I could go and get a decaffeinated coffee. Like, I don't drink that much, so I'm not too bothered by it. But it's what I bring to it. It's what I associate with that.
But this is another point. We'll get onto it later. It's about, like, how things are actually nested in. Yeah. Like, the things are way more complex than you think. It's not actually the coffee that does it. Like I just said, it's the whole routine of it and everything.
Exactly.
So let's move on to the next one, because I do think when we get onto the last ones, I'm going to be speaking for a while.
Yeah.
So I think I want to say the next one's the truth, right?
Yeah, tell the truth or at least don't lie.
I mean, we spoke about this quite a lot. So I think the main thing I've come to realize from this in general is this idea that when you lie, you have to kind of keep track of the lie.
Yeah.
In the sense that I think deep down we all know if we tell a lie, like we're conscious of, even if it's the smallest lie, you're always conscious of that very small deviation from what actually happened. Like you know it's the truth. Like there's like a voice in your head that tells you like that's not exactly what you thought happened. Yeah. That's not exactly what it is. And I think what Peterson says, which I can empathize with the most, was he's like, he came to realize when he started thinking about it that most of the stuff he said was like not really 100% true. Like it wasn't a lie. It was never 100% true. Like he had motives for saying this. Like, for example, he wanted to win an argument, or he wanted to gain status in people's eyes or impress them, if you kind of get what I mean. Yeah. So, and I think it's really interesting from reading Elephant in the Brain is like we all kind of twist truth or like what we do in life to make people feel more, or make ourselves seem better than we are.
Yeah.
And like, it's always, for me, what's more interesting is not even like the big lies, it's the little white lies.
Well, it always starts off like that. Yeah.
He says the white lies that like compound, because once you can just go, oh, I bended the truth a little bit just to sort of, to make sure they didn't punish me in some way, because it's probably usually to avoid a social punishment, like they're not going to be your friends, or they're going to think badly of you. But his point is like the way you destroy like your character is by lying small over and over again. Yeah. And he does seem to think that like the difference between, somebody who ends up as like a gulag guard, for example, in the Russian, or like you say like a Holocaust guard, would be somebody who basically just lies to themselves little by little, to the point where they're in such a state where they can't stand up anymore. So his point was like they would lie again and again and again and again, and then they're in too deep to be like, fuck, what I've done is wrong.
Back out now. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, no, exactly. And I think building on top of your point with the previous rule, everything kind of accumulates over time. And if you, first of all, like, if the more you tell a lie, the more likely you're going to tell a lie. It's a habit in itself. But yeah, exactly. It builds up. And then it's like you can't step out. Like I always think about it like corruption. You've got like a circle of you, and then you take a step out, take a step out, take a step out. Before you know it, you're so far out that you can't turn back. And it's like, well, okay. And then it kind of, it leads to different kind of behavior to try and either justify or rationalize, as he likes to say, because he says rationalizing is what the devil's bidding, pretty much. Yeah. Because you try to make it seem true to you.
And also rationalizations tend to be like, back to the elephant in the brain. Anytime you rationalize an action, it tends to be pro-social. It tends to be like the way you think about it. For example, if somebody said to you, if I said to you now, why did you do something? You would probably think, what would Jess find acceptable? And then say, you would almost unconsciously go what do you think this guy would find acceptable? Yeah, like,
because social truth comes second to social conformity.
Yeah.
And so what, like in a Freudian manner, you lie, and so then like there's this anxiety, or there's this anxiety around like, what if it pops up? So then you have to try and keep track of it and build other lies to make sure that it fits what you said. And then you end up suppressing all of this kind of anxiety, and then it over time it kind of manifests in certain behaviors. And if it starts to poke its head up, then you have to act, and you have to actually do an action that pushes it down, and then it starts to change your behavior. And then you start doing things, and then before you know it, like you said, you're a guard in the fucking gulag.
I think it's interesting, back to the Freud stuff, because he talked about as well, like all the psychoanalysis, I guess that's how you pronounce it, isn't it? They all came to the same sort of conclusion, where it's like lies actually do lead you to sort of like a mental illness, as you will, because you essentially, when you lie as well, you're sort of almost creating a separate identity in your brain, because your brain does know like the truth, you kind of get me, and it knows you've lied, so then it has to keep hold of two mutually incompatible ideas, and if you just build them up, eventually you almost got a
cognitive dissonance kind of thing. And I think it's really interesting, because I think depending on how you look at a lie, so there's the person that lies, and then there's the recipient who receives the lie. And I think the person who poses the lie, because it's not true, it leaves room for interpretation. It's like not clear, it's not precise. And so when that person who receives that lie, either they internalize that, and then they kind of have to make that fit, because you don't go around constantly thinking that people are lying to you. If you're so paranoid about everyone lying to you, then you wouldn't even ask.
Well, that's what schizophrenic people are, aren't they? Well, they think everybody's out to get them.
Pretty much.
I guess the reason why, I think interestingly as well, it's one of the points I got here. I've got so many notes on this. One of the points about the lying was that because you've lied, other people. Sorry, you don't even know. Yeah, that's it. Because you lied, you don't understand the consequences of your actions. You almost come to believe your lies at some point, right? Because like the more you repeat them, like you said, you get this idea that you get this cognitive dissonance between the lies you're telling yourself and then the truth, right?
Yeah.
And when you have both, one of them has to sort of be bigger than the other. And obviously then, like for example, if you then did contemplate the truth, everything you've built up over here in your brain, for example, doesn't mean anything. It's almost back to this like traumatic experience, like, because you almost start to come to believe your lies, and therefore when something goes wrong, you can't believe why it's gone wrong. You kind of get me? I guess the argument, fine, it's going to be hard if you're a listener to try and get where I'm at right now with this, because it's more like back to this A-B framework where you're position A and you're trying to get to position B. The more you lie, the more your position A is different. So you think you're this type of person. You think you're here in the social environment. You think this is you, and you're going to go to B.
Yeah.
The more you lie, the more this A becomes sort of like built on quicksand. I always use that analogy.
Exactly.
And therefore, when something goes wrong with this B, you just can't work out what it is, because you're starting at the wrong place.
Yeah.
You like, and also another thing about lying as well, I've realized, is the more you lie, first of all, people realize. And they don't believe you, and you think because we could give examples of our past. I reckon if Smithy was ever listening to this, he used to lie shitloads, like, and the thing is, like, I don't think he ever realized how much people talked about how much he was lying. Yeah. So I think he thought we all believed his lies, maybe.
Yeah.
Do you get me? Because nobody ever said to him, Smith, you're a massive liar, like, and said it straight. We might have joked to him, but nobody said to him, mate, by the way, you just keep lying. We all know you're lying. Like, you know you haven't done half the things you say you're doing.
Yeah.
And without that feedback, you think you're like this master of the universe and that everybody's believing your lies.
Yeah.
When in reality, everybody just looks at you and goes, what?
No, literally.
And that's what I mean by the false A. Because you've lied all the time and you think everybody thinks this because you've told them all these things. But people are intelligent, right? It's back to like somebody who shows off by buying a Ferrari and then he gives it all the chat like, oh no, I didn't buy it because, I wanted to show off. I bought it because this. And everybody knows that's a fucking lie.
Yeah.
So like, he thinks he's A, and everybody knows he's down here.
Yeah.
So you've built. You almost. It's like this classic idea that you talked about later, and I want to say it's part of this chapter, but it might not be, about ignoring your problems and ignoring the 800-pound gorilla in the room or whatever. And it's this lying. You sort of hide all the problems you have.
Yeah.
Get me? You didn't face what you could.
Well, I think like it ties in very well with his previous chapter that we just mentioned about the expediency, because to lie means you basically want the benefit right here and now.
Yeah.
And it's not thinking about the future. It's not thinking about that, you're destroying people's trust in you. Mm-hmm. You're basically getting a short-term benefit, and then later on you realize that there's an inconsistency and you have to maintain that lie and do it again so that you don't feel that consequence,
mm-hmm.
so that you don't actually approach the problem. And so then once again, it just leads you to becoming more and more expedient and more like looking for pleasure and impulse related.
Well, I think it also does that because you lose track of the world, because you lose your ability to go from A to B, because you're not even where you think you were, so nothing really works out for you, so you turn to pleasure. Because one of the things about, if you're that type of person, you can go from your position now to the goal you have. You build up confidence, because that's a positive feedback loop, and that proves that whatever you're doing in your life, you're manifesting what you want. But the people who lie tend to not manifest what they want, right? And this is interesting because one of the points I got here, which leads back to what we said earlier. So like, when something happens to you that you didn't want to happen, okay, the people who go, okay, it didn't work out, I still have something to learn, that is when you're being authentic and listen and almost following the path of God, as you will, or the truth. Like, something went wrong, that means I have to learn something in this situation, or I have to figure out what went wrong, right? The people who struggle, the ones who says, no, what I wanted to happen didn't happen, and that is because the world's unfair, people are jealous, or they don't understand me, it's their fault. Okay, and this is what he says here, because this reminds me of what I was saying to you earlier. The logic, if you follow that, because it's somebody else's fault, they should be stopped, they must be hurt, or they must be destroyed. And like, literally all
very an
bad
axiomatic
actions,
view.
like, but whenever all bad actions happen in the world in terms of like sort of rival conflict, it all happens from this idea of like, They can never understand me.
Yeah.
You know, they're in my way. It's their fault.
Yeah.
Mate, I'm worried about the world at the moment.
Oh,
all
mate,
I see is everybody going like, it's their fault. It's the government's fault.
You watched that Jordan Peterson and Douglas Murray, didn't you? Yeah. It's like I feel really scared in regards to a slight segue from this, but also it has a lot to do with it. Is, you know, what, like I said at the very beginning, it's like when you start distrusting, not trusting your opponent, then anything you say is tagged with, like, you know, not trusting
because they're not out for your benefit.
Well, this is it. It's like I can't say, if we were enemies, I can't say anything without you being like, well, I'm not going to believe you, because it's just like, it's the first thing you see before you actually hear what they say. It's like, well, I don't trust you. And like, this is the thing, is like with lies and small lies, and especially lies within systems that, you know, are so important, like governments and companies and all this kind of thing. It's like these little lies have built over time, and they try to squash it and, you know, push it down. But now it's led to being like, oh, well, I just saw that you lied. I don't trust you anymore. And it's like, it's quite hard to
come back from lying.
Well, exactly, because it tarnishes your whole
Well, it means anything you say in the future, like, what? Exactly. How can I trust you? Yeah, no, agree. Exactly. I agree.
Like, you could say, you could look at the context, but it's still an action in itself, and you've thought about lying.
I think one of the worst things about this always, like, if you really, the problem, okay, right, this is back to like facts, and this is what Peterson says, like, facts don't change, but you can interpret them in different ways.
Yeah.
And also the problem with statistics is there's many problems with statistics. Mainly the fact that they're usually estimates. They're not real. You need to understand.
Based on an average.
Yes, but fine. That's another good point. First of all, statistics, you know, they reveal some truth, but you need to figure out how they were measured. How big was the sample size? Because quite a lot of they do is they just, you know, they take a small sample and then they extrapolate out based on percentages or whatever.
Yeah. And no one's the average.
But the point which you just said about average is even more interesting. Is this idea that, like, okay, right, think about low resolution problems, or like zoomed out, like the whole problem, the high resolution problem. So the point that I saw recently was like, fine, you can zoom all the way out, right, and you can be like, okay, this many people died of COVID, right, or whatever. And then you could zoom into the problem more and be like, okay, how old were their age group, right? Do you kind of get what I mean? Like, there are different resolutions to how you look at things. And the point is, the problem with government at the moment, and this is back in the ergodicity book I recently read, is they're focusing on these average numbers, and they're focusing on, like, and this is what they do with the economy as well, mate. So, for example, they've made most of their decisions based on, actually, do you know what? I don't know how they made their decisions, but you would assume that they look at the average data. And because I actually genuinely, this is what I think. I don't think there's any malice in the government's actions. I think they're just not very good at statistics, so they don't understand what they're doing. And I think they've seen it at a high level problem with averages and stuff, like, oh, the average person has lost this much money, or the average person this and that. When in reality, they should be zooming into the problem and going like, right, who's the ones who are most affected? They're the ones who need help. Not the other people. Do you kind of get what I mean? Because when you take an average, you're spreading out across the average, and like you said, the average doesn't exist.
Yeah.
What's the average problem in the country?
But
you zoom in on the problems and you solve the problems at their level. You know, you can't just solve somebody's problem by, like, let's just say your business has gone bust. Oh, I'm going to give everybody 500 quid. You should be fine. Yeah. It's like, no. There's people out there who don't need the money, and there's people out there who do. And you need, like, a higher level of resolution to solve these problems. You don't just go, you know, the average person now has lost this much money, therefore we need to replace it. Whereas some people have lost a lot than others.
Well, because you're attributing the problem to everyone else. And that's the thing, is like, you know, you have a problem and then you say, oh, the average person is dealing with it like this, and so everyone should have the same solution. It doesn't make sense. It's the same, like, you know, no matter what your view is on this, it's like the same kind of goes for COVID in regard to, like, okay, so you've got, you know, the elderly and frail, you know, who are at the most risk, and so everyone should stop working and be paid furlough. Even though you've got, you know, more than, you know, that's a minority in regard to the whole population.
But it also should be on, like, for example, like the businesses that are hit the hardest should be the ones with the most help. Not just like a blanket, everybody gets help. It's like the ones who actually prove they need help get the help. I mean, obviously then you could argue, oh, it'll be too slow, but then you wouldn't end up with the level of fraud that's happening, etc. It's just like...
But it's like, rather than helping the people that actually need the help, you're diluting all of your resources and solutions by giving it to everyone. You're paying everyone in the UK rather than paying the people that actually really need it.
Yeah, exactly. You know? Exactly. It's a fucking...
It's so interesting with this kind of, like, average perspective, because the problem is made up of numerous things, right? It's not just one problem. It's like numerous things that make it up. And then you're taking an average of that and saying, and then an average of all the people. So you're just saying like, what, like no one's the average. No one's going to be that one person that has all of those same conditions.
I have to say, the one interesting thing they did do, which shows they did actually localize problems a little bit, is this idea of shutting down local areas based on, in my head, it had to be based on the hospital capacity. So that actually shows definite better levels of forethought. Because, for example, they could be, what's the average amount of COVID, or what's the total amount of COVID cases in the UK? Oh, it's not that high. But if you localize the problem and you zoom in again and you go, okay, Bristol has got shitloads of COVID cases in comparison to the rest of the world. Their hospital capacity is this. They've almost hit their capacity. Therefore, they need to be tier 4. That, in my head, people don't think, I think people have forgotten that that's probably the mindset that the government did when they did these tiered lockdowns in different places. It wasn't because, it was more just to save people's lives based on the data, which is probably like, that hospital is almost full. If it does get full, more people are going to die. Yeah. So like the tier system in that sense, localized, made a lot more sense to me than just going national lockdown. Because national lockdowns like apply the same rules to everybody when one country, one area isn't in trouble. Yeah. So that I think was better. But let's move past COVID. You could talk about it for ages, and you still wouldn't even come to any conclusions because there's so many different perspectives. So we got past the lying. And I think we did, unless there's more.
No, that was pretty much all I had.
What was the next chapter, mate?
So the next one is assume that the person you are listening to might know something you don't.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so for this one, I'm gonna go all the way down. I had a load of stuff here about a lot more of this was, I don't even know if this fits into the truth bomb, but about like having an aim and stuff. I think we've already gone over it, and then. Servants of ambition, integrating. I quite like this point. Sorry, on a side note, this idea that this is back to the meaning. I think so. The end changes the meaning of the past in the sense that a film's ending changes the meaning of the whole entire film. There was a sacrifice in the film, like somebody was to die, and in the end there was a happy ending. His sacrifice wasn't for nothing, and this is the point with like finding meaning and having a goal. It can justify the troubles in your life because you have this goal. So if you're feeling down, you're going there. Like you can justify the struggle because you're somewhere else better to be. I thought that was really interesting.
What's like tying that in with like ideologies, it's similar, but you're justifying the means to get there. So as in like, everything is worth the end result, which is very like, Nazi, like, Hitler. But I think my point that I had on this, like we talked a lot about kind of communication, especially with like how to have impossible conversations and a lot of kind of techniques like that. But I think with this one, my one was kind of like you have to be on the same playing field. You have to have the same kind of approach and be rooted in the same value when you have a conversation, because if you're on different levels, then you're talking about different things, and sorry, can you just a sec?
Yeah, one sec, mate.
Shut up.
just shut up. Just shut up.
Just shut the fuck up. Okay, no, what was that? Yeah, so I think you have to be rooted in the same value, because if you're not, then you're not talking about the same things, or you don't have the same kind of goals in a way. I would
change the word that you said, value. I would change it to rooted in the same problem, maybe, or the same. Yeah. Like, do you know what I mean? You're both on the same wavelength about the topic. Do you know what I mean? You have to have an agreement on what the fuck you're even talking about. That kind of makes sense.
Well, this is it, and I think like he also talks about it in the How to Have Impossible Conversations, but basically be rooted in like truth, as in like you're not going in trying to like push the other person down. You get a lot of conversations that are basically just revolve around people showing off so that they kind of show where they are in the fucking dominance hierarchy, or show that they're smarter than you or whatever. But I think by being on the same kind of like trajectory as the other person, to be like, well, this is what we're both trying to find truth. We're both kind of there. We just have different ways of seeing it and different kind of like things. Why is there a rift, or why is there a difference? And how do we like find that?
I think so the chapter was called, what was it? Treat everybody as if you've got something to learn from them, right? Yeah. And that like you just said, Impossible Conversations literally starts with the mindset that every time you meet somebody, if they say something you disagree with, you know, that's their conclusion. You probe them for their reasoning. Like everybody can teach you something in terms of how somebody could believe what they, if you think what they believe is ridiculous, right? You can learn how somebody could believe that, because usually people do have rational underpinnings, and if they don't, then it tends to be emotional. Like the emotional connection they have with some sort of idea, right? What I found interesting in terms of like practical advice he gave, which I really love, and I've seen it so many times in communication books, it's always the same thing. Whenever somebody has a discussion with you, if you can't say back to them exactly what they said to you with a way that they agree, you haven't listened to them and you don't understand what they're saying, which I found it's just fascinating, isn't it? If I can't repeat back to you exactly what you're saying, then we can't even have a discussion because we're talking about different things.
But this is it. And I think like relating it back to your point about like point A and B, you're trying to find out where someone's point A is so that you can understand their thought process. It's like the epistemology. You're trying to like go back through their thought process and be like thought processes and be like, okay, well, this is where you started and this is how you started to get these kinds of thoughts, you know. And it makes so much sense, because then you can tie it to their root and their value and why they see that, because then you can be like, oh, I understand why you think that, because this is what it's kind of rooted in, you know. And I think
I was gonna say, what's quite interesting is like what I've been doing to you more recently, and you've done it to me a few times as well. Whenever you say a word, I'll be like, what do you mean by that? Like you'll be like, you'll say something to me and I'll be like, what do you mean by that? And I find it so interesting, because that's the best way to get to, like, if I want to understand what you're saying, because we all have our own terminology for things. Like I remember you always used to use low resolution, high resolution before I probably got my head around it and stuff, right? And I used to think, oh, like, what does he mean by that? Like, what does he mean exactly by that? But the more now I ask, if you say something I don't understand, I should be like, what do you mean? Like, what do you mean by that word? And people didn't do that at all, right? They'll just have an argument about the government, and it's like, what do you mean by government? It's just the most easy question. And also, it shows you're curious. To me, it's like the most obvious thing. So somebody goes, I hate the fact that, you know, this something happened, and I'll be like, what do you mean by that? Like, or what does this mean? Like, what does this word mean? And you get out of them. And also, what I find really interesting is I reckon you can call a lot of bullshitters out, but if they say stuff like, oh, we're going to radically disrupt the industry, like, what do you mean by disruption? And then I'll be like, oh, I don't know, because I'm just chatting shit.
By questioning, you kind of shine a light on like where there may be holes in their
logic.
This
is the seeding doubt, isn't it? Like you don't attack them. You just go. You make them attack themselves by pretty. That's it. You make them attack themselves. Just like somebody gives you stuff. Oh, I hate how this is going. I'm like, oh, what's going on? Yeah. You know, you just keep probing these questions, like, because what I think a lot of people do in communication is we trade conclusions. And this is like one of the things I saw in an argument book. It was like, when you have an argument with somebody, you're trading conclusions. You did this wrong. That's my conclusion. Why did you do it wrong is the question. Do you get what I mean?
Yeah, no, exactly.
We're trading conclusions. Like, I believe this. Why do you believe this? It's like an apparent question. This is what you mean. You have something to learn from everybody. Because otherwise what you do is you take their conclusion, and then you either disagree with it or you agree with it, or you try to build on it. You don't understand where it's come from. You're not exploring. This is what you mean by like searching for the truth together.
Exactly.
You're both exploring your own reasoning.
Yeah.
I think I had a really good quote here. Yeah, that's it. A real conversation like that puts you in a realm where souls connect, and that's a real place. It leaves you thinking that was really worthwhile. Yeah. We really got to know each other. The mask came off and the searches were revealed. I like the mask.
Yeah, and I think like I wrote here is that, you know, first of all, like I think he had a point here saying that like knowledge is not measured by the amount you have, but by the like continual pursuit of it. Like I'm paraphrasing that, but basically, you know, you don't just know everything.
Of course not.
Because if you did, you'd go around life and you just have everything sorted out, which isn't
exactly. You would be able to like seduce anybody on the spot. You'd have $1 billion. Like, do you know what I mean? You'd have all the things that you'd ever wish for if you knew everything, which you don't, because you don't have that. So it's like, have some fucking humility, right?
And I think the pursuit of knowledge ties in so much with like ego. Yeah, you know, it's like, do you think that you just know everything and you don't want to go learning about anything? And it's funny, like, going back to your point about like, you know, when we press each other about what something means or what your definition of something means, is I used to like I don't have the best vocabulary in the world. Yeah. And so now whenever anyone is just saying something, I used to not question what that word might mean if I didn't know it. I just like try and get the rest of the sentence and
of course,
make an idea of it.
That's how you learn most of your language, right? But if you don't ask, you don't.
But if you don't ask, you don't know.
I'll give you an example exactly like this. My grandma used the word insipid earlier, and I was like, well, what do you mean by insipid? And like, to be honest, this is embarrassing. I can't even remember what she fucking said.
But
you know what I mean? Yeah. In the moment, she clarified it to me, and that's important, because otherwise you could say stuff to me, and I'll just be like, okay, like. But then I project onto you my understanding, and that's where the issues come, because I project my reality onto yours without getting your reality first. And I really like this, what you talked about earlier, because this makes so much sense. Because what we're doing now as well in our podcast is basically we're articulating ideas almost for the first time, right? We are articulating as we go now to discover the way we think. The way we do, almost, right? For me, this is the whole point of doing this. And he talks about, like, when you start asking people about what they genuinely mean, they often articulate their ideas for the first time, because, as I said, you're walking around as a conclusion. When I question you, you start going back in and start seeing the reasoning. And you can't do it without wandering down, like, sometimes, and realizing you don't know what you're talking about. Because I'm like in the middle of a sentence and I'm like, actually, hang on a second, maybe that isn't true.
That's when that whole reveals itself.
Yes, and then obviously that's a new question to try and figure out.
Exactly.
I
think it's really interesting, and I'm going to tie it quickly to that podcast of Jordan B Peterson and Douglas Murray, because he talks about American politics, but he talks about it in regards to the left and right. They should both be valued in the same thing, which is like helping the people, right? That's their sole purpose. But now it has changed to basically being a competition and hitting the other one harder. And this whole process is pushing one, and then their whole thing is like, well, instead of sorting the problem out, you hit them back, and you're kind of just spreading the spectrum further and further. So you're getting far right and far left, and it's just becoming more of a competition rather than like actually solving the problem. And I think his point was like, you just need one of them to stop and say, no, okay, we're not. This isn't what we're rooted in. We're rooted in helping people, and we're not going to play your game about hitting the other one back or revenge. We're going to stand still and go like, okay, well, we need to do this.
Okay.
Because otherwise you just end up going back to the whole trust thing. When you can't trust your opposition, and they're providing perfectly.
Well, I guess the argument is, when you're doing this, there's no communication happening at all. You're not trying to understand each other. You're just trying to provoke each other, isn't it? It's just a mutually. You're just increasing the provocation each time, and you're just trying to see which one snaps first and does something so bad that everybody ridicules them almost. I feel like that's almost what's going on.
Yeah.
But yeah. What's the next chapter then?
Okay, so the next one is be precise in your speech.
Oh fuck yeah, good stuff.
I bet you fucking love this.
Well, I mean, I've been just thinking about it quite a lot recently. So first of all, I think he starts off this chapter talking about how everything's nested in layers of complexity, since that everything's nested in different within different technological circuits. So for example, your computer is made out of electricity. It's made out of the parts, but you just the whole. The whole point is, we see one thing and it's nested in complexity. Like the idea, okay, right? I think this is the one that people can get without having to think too hard. It's, you see somebody for the first time, right?
Yeah.
You sort of, all you can take in really is probably what they look like, their behavior. So you can probably sort of work out roughly who you think they are within the first, couple of minutes, but you don't see the nested complexity in terms of their relationships with other people, their goals, their past. We only see that if you're going to get so much context. There's so much vagueness in everything. Like, we only see what we think we see. So basically what we're doing is living in an illusion, right?
Yeah.
And how this sort of links into this idea of being precise is, I find specifically, though I find it, across the board, the more I think about it, how vague people are. With everything,
so
with vice, with anything. So, like, for example, the classic ones I see, because I was reading a lot. Well, I studied business and also did a lot around marketing. It's like they say stuff like, follow your passion, or have a passion-driven brand, have an authentic brand. What the fuck does that even mean? Like, this is the idea of like vagueness. You can hide behind vagueness because you're not specific enough to have somebody criticize you.
There's plausible deniability.
Literally this, right? And as a lot of people just give the most wishy-washy, sort of, like, not. I guess this is back to what we were just saying about this conversation between people. Whenever they give you a conclusion they have, that is vagueness there, right?
Yeah.
That's effectively vague in the sense that they've given you very little information, and then you bounce off that and you think you know what they're talking about, and you add or you project yourself onto them, being like, he behaved this way, or he said this, I don't agree with this, therefore I'm going to attack him.
Yeah.
Specificity is being like, what do you mean by that? It's
exactly.
Be more specific to. Okay, another example. the attribution bias. It's when somebody does something bad, you attribute it to their character rather than the context. Whereas when you do something bad, you'll be like, oh, but he made me do it, or the environment, I was stressed. But when other people do it, it's their character, and that's really fascinating because it just shows like an asymmetry in your perception that you would let situational factors affect you. You would blame like you're in a mood, whereas other people just think they're evil or they're bad people. And this leads me to the vagueness of your specificity, because with you, you're more specific because you've or like, sorry, I guess you are being specific with them, but you've done it in a way that you haven't asked any questions. You just straight away go, that's quite vague. Oh, he's a bad person. No, it's not. That behavior is bad. If you kind of get me, that's another thing. Back to it's vague and specific. So, we talked about like, what's the best way of saying it? We have like abstract terms such as good person, good, bad, and inside that good person is what Peterson always talks about. There's like a nested behaviors. So like
what we consider it.
Yeah, but it's obviously to each person. This is like, what do you mean by good? Because every person good's better. But like you have good person and you have like a branch. That's how you visualize it. And you'd be like, donates to charity potentially. Helps old people on the street. Puts others before himself. And you have all these acts within good, right? Then you start these acts within evil. And I find what's interesting as well with people is they tally up their good and they try and ignore their bad.
Oh yeah.
I feel like this is another thing about being precise. Like, this idea of like vague or using abstractions or stuff which aren't really clear cut. So I think good and bad is a very, very good example. It's more interesting when you get into
binary.
In fact, this is a great example as well. Another time people are vague. You watch the same sporting match, right? And somebody's actions. This is back to like, remember I spoke to you the other day about analog and digital communication. So digital communication would be obviously like binary, zeros and ones. You're not going to misinterpret what I'm saying to you because I'm direct. Analog is like there's more up to interpretation. Two people, in fact, I'll tell you what, thousands of people watch the same football match. Depending what side you're on, depends how you interpret the game. And like for me, this shows like this vagueness of like reality. Reality is vague, and we pick up different patterns in the vagueness. And what's the best way of saying it? Like, for example, like let's just say I said to you, I watched the football match the other day, and that person played really well. What do you mean by played well? It's like if you start questioning how, like, do you know what I mean? People actually have such vague conclusions about things.
Well,
somebody kept saying to me every time I said something, be like, "What do you mean by that?" Because eventually you realize you know fucking nothing, or like you're perceiving stuff, making conclusions without even knowing.
Well, I think the reason behind it is like, reality itself is so complex and there's so much to pick up on, and we can't pick up on all of it. There's so much information coming to us. So we use binary thinking as one of them to kind of simplify it all. But the problem is that like when that's kind of attributed or projected as if you already know something, as if it's certain, and that's where it kind of goes wrong. And I think like when speech isn't precise, and then a conversation occurs, there's ambiguity in it, and so there's room for people to fill that. So let's say there's like you understand 70% of it, 30% of it was like almost like misty, so then you project your idea, you project the other 30%, and what you are is made up of so many different things, your personality, your problems, all these kinds of things. And so then that's where misinterpretation occurs. And it's like that's where people's also like judge people's intentions. It's like you say something without a certain intention, but you can interpret it as like racist or or certain so many different ways of interpreting it. But that's because a lot of the time you're projecting what you think the rest of the conversation was about.
You project without specifying. You project vagueness because
I guess like from the person who's actually speaking point of view, because that was more from like the recipient, the person who's conveying it, I wonder if you could argue that like a lack of clarity means unconfidence, because like you said, is like when you're vague, you have this like shield to hide behind of like plausible deniability, because they can't pin you on it. It's like, oh, I don't know. It's the same thing with joking, and we've talked about this numerous times. It's like when you joke and someone pins you on it, it's like, oh, no, I was just joking, And so there's like vagueness in there, but there's also truth. And so I wonder if you could say that like, someone who's less clear is kind of hiding behind this kind of
hiding behind the fact that they don't really know. I do think there is a level of that, mate, because if you think about what Actually, I was about to say law is kind of that, but law isn't actually. Law's the opposite. Law is where you try and be so specific that you have to write out so many lines of interpretation to make sure it's very specific.
Well, because you're trying to understand the interpretation, the intention. Sorry, it's like that's why there are all those rules, and like you said, like that's what loads of lawyers try to do because things are so context dependent, and you try to understand someone's intention behind something. Mm-hmm. I think the difference is like. There are a lot of rules that are set in society that are so vague because they're just blanket rules, and you can't apply a blanket rule to every context. But when you do, then there's vagueness. It's like, well, how do we interpret this now?
Yeah.
And I think that's why it's quite interesting with, like, he talks about it in the book as well, to do with religion, is religion was its own downfall because it's got these Christianity, it's got these 10 commandments, okay? But there's so much complexity in the world, and sometimes there's not like a clear-cut answer. And so when there's that room for like, to be understood, then that propels some people to be curious and figure out what is the answer to that. And then that kind of led more and more to science, the revolution of science and that kind of thing.
I think what's interesting as well with this like specificity and vagueness is that I guess most people don't even realize how vague they're being, right? I feel like one of the most common things that people get is like, I'm even bad for it. For example, I get annoyed if somebody doesn't understand what I'm telling them. But like, this is like, remember that book, Made to Stick, with the curse of knowledge? We all have the curse of knowledge in the sense that we know our intentions, we know what we want to say. Yeah. But unless you make it very specific and clear, people will always have room to misinterpret, misunderstand you. Yeah. And I feel like one of his main points about this specific thing as well is be specific with what you're telling people to do as well. So for example, if you're getting in an argument with somebody, instead of being like, you're a bad person, that's very vague because there's a bad person, as I said, and it's nested under loads of behaviors, and also they don't know exactly what they've done right. You do something, I don't know, you leave the stove on, or you're fucking shitty cunt. Oh god, that's but yeah, you know what I mean. I go in on you, and I've been aggressive towards you. There's no clarity in what you've done. Whereas if I say to you, when you leave the stove, it annoys me. And I think what's interesting as well is we spoke about this before as well. So whenever people beat themselves up, it tends to be that there's obviously, like we just said, there's a bad person, for example, and then there's all these nested behaviors or whatever. Yeah. And what happens is you do something wrong, and then you just go up the list. So instead of just being, I did this wrong today, like I missed, I don't know, I didn't clean up today because I was feeling lazy, and then that traverses into I'm lazy all the time. Then that traverses are lazy people, they're like unlovable, and then that's how you feel depressed because you've like traversed from one specific behavior to your whole
nest.
And this is like this is the difference between being vague and specific. The more specific you are with the thing you've done wrong, the more chance you are of solving, like reducing the fact that could happen again in the future. Because if it's about your character rather than that behavior, you are going to struggle to fix the problem. So because if it's about you as a whole, as a person, you're less likely to fix that because that's a big fucking job. Then if it was just, I forgot to do this, so this time I forgot to do it, therefore I'm going to put a reminder on my phone. Or that type of thing is, and I love that because I think it just is so, it reminds me so much of his points, all of his points, like A to B. Yeah, you're A going to B. If your B is very vague, you're never going to get anywhere. Because you need to have something specific to aim for to make stuff meaningful. Because if you're like, I say this, but then I said something earlier about, this is where I'm contradicting myself here. I said better person, but I guess you could argue that becoming a better person, you can have metrics which is specific. So I don't know, do one good deed today. But this is like why goal setting is important, because you become specific with what it is that you want to do, and therefore you can measure yourself against it. What I find really interesting is I personally struggle to do things unless I'm very specific with the job. So if I haven't figured out what it is that would constitute as completing a task, I won't even bother doing the task. Do you get me? Like if there isn't like a clear-cut end goal, I will procrastinate because I don't know what it's. Because then the task seems like a never-ending long task. Because if I was like be the best Jess possible, what the fuck does that mean? Usually what you do is when you go to these like goal setting things with like Tony Robbins, right? You would have like, he helps you work through your goals and you write them out, and then you be specific with them. And then obviously when you're more specific, there becomes something that you can actually measure yourself against.
Well, this is it. And it's something attainable rather than abstract. Like, it's so abstract to say, well, I'm going to be the best Jess I can be. And it's like, well, what, you don't know what that means. There's no action that you can actually pursue there. If you then pull it down to like an actionable thing, and like Jordan Peterson talks about this, it's like separating, the idea from the person, or separating the like action from the person in regards to like an idea takes on a world of its own. And so many people will die for their idea, for their reasoning, but the whole idea is that the whole concept is that you should be able to detach yourself from it, I don't know if that tied in so much, but
I think another interesting thing I just thought about the specific v the vague is the best marketing. Also, like any company that sells you something, they don't go, this is the best soft drink. They'll be like, this is the cheapest soft drink. This gives you the most energy. They're very specific with their claims.
Yeah.
They're very specific with what it does for you. Yeah. Like I could say to you, I'm going to give you a course that makes you a better person, or I say, I'm going to give you a course that makes you $1 million. Which one are you going to buy? One that's way more specific to you. Yeah. Like if I understand your problem, I can pitch myself as somebody. This is back to like
understanding something.
Remember, like I was saying, selling to you, right? In my head, there's only a few ways I can sell to you. Like I can change your B, so the place you're going. I can convince you my place, which I think of B is better for you than where you think you're going. I can convince you that I'm the only way you can get to B from A. I can convince you that your A is a threat, and therefore I can protect you from whatever's going to take you away from that A. For example, I could do a fear-based thing where you're going to lose your position, or I could convince you that all of it's wrong, and then you follow me and we join like a cult. You're looking at the wrong thing. You're the wrong person. I'm going to help you from this mismatch of chaos. But it all follows really interesting idea like of this. If you're having a conversation with somebody, you need to work out the specifics of the situation before you offer a solution. This is why the government get it wrong, because almost the average by definition is vague, because it's vague in the sense that it's not specific to the individual's problem. It's vague because it's addressing the whole problem together without any sort of granularity in it, and that's
can't take into consideration.
That's why it's problematic, right? It's one size fits all. It's like trying to It's like
a blanket rule can't fit everyone's context.
And the last thing I got on that, to be honest, mate, is just like back to what we said in the last bit we were chatting about, which is with specificity, you should define what you're arguing about up front.
Yeah.
I agree. Or if somebody, I guess another really good way of like combating somebody who criticizes something you do, being like, they criticize, you did this, you're a bad person. It's like, what was it about that annoyed you?
Yeah.
Like, what was it exactly that pissed you off?
Well, I think it's quite interesting because going back to the whole A to B thing, it's like if first of all what you just said, as in be specific about what your conclusion is, what your B is, right? Because once you know where your B is, because it's quite hard for us to kind of understand where we are in terms of our A.
Yeah.
Like it can be quite difficult to figure that out. But like when you say what your B is, then you can kind of go back and try and figure out where your A is from that.
Well, A is a really interesting one because a lot of it comes from your social, your past and your social environment. How do people react to you?
Yeah.
Like what is the current environment telling you about yourself? That's why you're so interested in other people. Can you hear me?
No.
It's just you're so interested in the way people react to you and your social status because it gives you a better version of A where you're at. You're gonna get me. So you know what you're capable of. It's very useful to know where you're at because then you know what your value is in the mating market or what your value is as part of society almost, right?
And then you can make more accurate goals.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's based on your reality. It's like, this is the thing, and we talked about this last week actually, with that ability to make accurate goals. And I think a lot of what goes around, especially with the self-help thing, kind of distorts your idea of what you are capable of.
I can tell you can achieve anything, right?
Well, the thing is, you can achieve anything, but you can't achieve everything right now. Mm-hmm. And so I think the difference is that all these like kind of self-help books, they say that you can just do it right now, like it's possible, but it's like, well, I can't suddenly make $1 million right now. Mm-hmm. It's like a long plan, and I can and the accuracy is being able to judge how long and what I have to do to get that $1 million. Do you get what I mean? And so you have to
how many different ways can you do it?
Well,
There's so many different ways.
This is it. You have to make those accurate plans in relation to where you are right now.
Mm-hmm.
If I made a plan, I'd be like, I'm going to make $1 million by next week. It's like, well, that's not accurate because it's not like I'm even close to making.
I think it's very interesting.
In fact, I'm probably going the other way.
The more I think about it, like this AB model is very interesting in the sense that like you can define like a course of action, or like the best course ever would be to get somebody to define their A pretty articulately, like to measure where they think they are, ask for friends for feedback, then also decide what they really, really want based on what they value, and then work out what opportunities they have to get to there. And like you write this all out and you articulate it, then you've got a fucking good plan. You know where you are, you know where you're going, and then you put the plan in place. And then you put the plan in place by picking out specific behaviors that you can do regularly. Like that's how I do it. It's pretty.
There we go.
But yeah, let's move on because to be honest, we could on a Rome recap. I'm pretty sure we'll end up going into that a bit more.
Yeah, I think so
I've
as
got
well.
some other stuff on it. So.
All right, so we are on to number 11, which is do not bother children while they are skateboarding.
Right. Okay. So
take us away.
Yeah, I don't really have too much on this. The remaining of my notes tend to be more around some of the not abstract, some of the specific points he has in the. I think it might even be from his coda. You know, he has like a thing at the end of the book. But anyway, from this chapter, I remember it being very similar to the chapter on the children and how to socialize children, basically. And if my understanding is correct, the whole point of not telling a child to get off when he's skateboarding, I think, which is what the phrase is more about letting them build up personal responsibility and reliance on themselves. So like the whole idea of letting a kid stumble is essentially like almost the human journey, in that we always face like adversity and things that don't go the way we want them to do. And the whole idea of like the human hero myth or whatever, like our journey is to overcome this. And the whole point is the children are doing stuff which is inherently dangerous, as you will, or can cause physical pain. So it shows great courage, and they are trying to traverse or trying to increase their understanding and their ability to perform on a skateboard. So what they're actually doing is relatively heroic. They know that the cost of failure when they're skateboarding is pain, and damaging themselves. Who are you to say as an adult, stop doing that? I guess obviously there's the consequences of, oh my god, they might die, they might really injure themselves. But the whole point of it is they are facing up to something which is scary and just overcoming it. And obviously there are plenty of times where that can go wrong and they can break a leg. Hypothetically, they could die. Some people probably have died. More people die from other things, probably from obesity and not, being lazy. Do you know what I mean? Like, this is back to this like obsession with like short-term injuries rather than long-term. Like, so if they have a short-term injury skateboarding and they learn to overcome it, fine. Whenever they injure themselves, got it. Like you say, I'm a bit sadistic in the sense that no, because what they're doing is they're showing courage and they're standing up, they're building self-responsibility, they're overcoming adversity, right? And then, or you could claim, what about the person who you quashed all that sort of urge to overcome things and basically made them set it like a potato, and they get heart disease because they're not doing stuff. I mean, it's an extreme example, right? But like, it's not an either or, but also at the same time, like when you teach somebody that everything has to be safe, you have to be like, you have to feel comfortable. What the fuck are you teaching them?
Well, this is it. And I think what's interesting is like, everyone has different kind of barriers. Or like levels of resistance, and like your parents can't teach you that. You have to learn that. You have to learn where your subjective kind of like barrier is to things and where like your resistance goes to. And this whole thing of like, if you stop them, then you stop them from finding that ability, and also because they have to overcome adversity to get to that point, to understand where that resistance is, and like.
But they also you get used to having setbacks, you get used to like things not going away and then overcoming it, and like that is essentially like the human journey. I love the Hydra thing. I get it. Like you chop off one head and then you got 8 other problems afterwards, or 7. It just makes sense that your life is just full of like, if you do take this like thing true, which I do believe to be true, you're always at this position going for B, and B can be because of like hunger drives, it can be through sexual drives, like trying to get you to this new stage, right? Because if we didn't have this new stage, we would never act, right? And I get that. It makes so much sense that you're going to have this, you're always here, you're trying to find somewhere else, right? If you don't learn that like you can't always attain this unless you work hard and you overcome all the barriers, then if people give you the B, what the fuck do you do with your life?
Or also, it's not a relevant B. Like, how
can
can I give you, like, once again, go back, how can I give you a B if I don't know your A?
True.
So parents constantly give their kids a B, and obviously, with
like go to law school, go to this, do that, or
exactly. And it's like, but you don't know them, you don't know what their kind of interest and all that kind of thing is, or what their actual B is, because you don't know what their A is. And I think like this like like you just said, basically this is just teaching them how to turn chaos into order, you know. And if you constantly interrupt that, then well, they're pretty much stuffed because they won't be able to tackle problems.
I do think there is, like, from what I can see at least, a lot of confidence to be had from achieving something yourself.
Yeah.
Do you get me? In the sense of, like, these skateboarders, I mean, like, they're use a skateboard as an example, but it involves anything where it involves some level of danger and overcoming it.
Well, they're understanding the concept of risk.
And they're proving to themselves that they can overcome adversity, or, like, as we keep saying this, but they can prove to themselves that they can overcome any problem to solve what they need to do or do what they need to do. And it's a good thing to have.
Yeah.
It build, like, especially if you look at I was looking at video games, so I'm reading that Gamer's Brain. Yeah. And what's really interesting is this idea of, like, the incentive reward system. And, like, so first of all, gaming in my head, I could use Pokemon as an example here, but they make it very clear what your goals are in the sense of, like, in a video game, you very much get orientated to your immediate goal. So let's just say you go into an open world video game. They have a HUD, they give you a health, whatever. They give you, like, the checkpoint to go to. They show you what weapons are. So basically, you've got a good understanding of, like, A, and then B is, like, your goal, right? Sorry.
Yeah.
I hope I'm going to get this correct. And you, throughout the video game, obviously you're traversing to B, and you get feedback that you're getting to B via XP points when you're killing people or finding new weapons. You are increasing your competence based on the actions you're taking, and you're getting feedback. When you skateboard, if you fall over less and less, you are building up this competence level, which you feel, which cues you to go more further and further forward. But if I sit you in a classroom and say, you're not allowed any danger, I've got to protect you from everything that's outside, you're never going to build up that competence level or the ability to solve stuff yourself. Because in a video game, like, I'm not listening, my mum's not telling me, oh, Jess, look over there, watch out, there's a guy who's trying to kill you. You build up this confidence in yourself to deal with the environment, as you will, or a task that you're after. Like, the reason why people get addicted, the reason why people in life end up all these different things, like somebody's good at music, somebody's good at art, somebody's good at this, is because they find it early, they get in and they build up competence, and it's like a feedback loop on that competence, and they follow it all the way. And the point here is, if they're doing something which is they're building competence on, and it might be slightly dangerous, just don't stop them. Yeah, let them do it. Let them find out for themselves.
Let them find their own like, you know, barrier or whatever. It's so funny. Literally, as I was walking back home today, I walked past a bus and there was an advert on it, and it was for a mask, and it said, "Stay safer in your bubble." And I was just like, fucking hell, just like, we're all going to be walking around with those, like, fucking bubbles.
Yeah, Zorballs.
You know, where we're not allowed to touch anyone or even, like, talk to anyone. Like, everyone just is already, like, I would love to know how much Deliveroo has shot up at the moment. People don't go outside.
They're about to IPO.
Yeah. I read something the other day that said that, like, people from the age of 18 to 30, it's like 18% of them aren't having sex anymore.
Oh, really? Yeah, because of it. Wow. Yeah, I can imagine.
It's ridiculous.
Can you imagine what's going to happen when they all get let loose?
Oh my God, mate. It's going to be havoc. It's going to be chaos. We're going to turn it into order, mate.
Right. Last one, mate.
Last one.
It's been a long one.
It has indeed been a good one, though.
This one was really, really abstract and weird, wasn't it? It was like,
pet a cat when you encounter one on the street.
What was the reasoning for this again? I remember because he talked about dogs for a while, and then he was like, what was it? Why was it about petting a cat, mate? Can you remember?
So I didn't actually get many notes on this one.
This is what I mean. My interpretation of it would be like, you have to enjoy some of the moment. Like, that was it. Enjoy the small things, wasn't it? It was like, I think it was something along the lines of, the life's made up of all the small moments, and you should enjoy them as you can, and not, you know, you should take a moment to relax and enjoy the moment for what it is. And that was the idea of just petting a cat as you see it on the street. And he did say you could do it to a dog too. It's not discriminatory towards cats.
I think my big point with this was that he was kind of saying, like, you know, like, complexity happens, chaos happens, you know, shit happens, basically. You know, people die, people, like, loved ones die, like, there's illness, and it's all kind of, you have to kind of learn to love the bad with the good.
Yeah,
you know,
I know. I agree with that. Yeah,
and
it's like human life is suffering, and you should try and find all the silver light, all the nice things in the small, like almost irrelevant things in your life.
Yeah,
do you get me? And that doesn't have, like. Do you get me? Like patting the cat doesn't have a meaning. It's like still enjoy the moments which doesn't have meaning because they're fleeting and they're gone at some point.
Yeah, and I think like my main point from this, that I interpreted was that, life is fucking hard. It is hard to, it's effortful. You have to genuinely make an effort to overcome adversity, which is constant. There's always things pushing you down, saying like, be lazy, don't try, all that kind of thing. And it's in your face all the time. And so it's kind of humbling for you to be able to overcome that. Mm-hmm. It's humbling for you to be able to deal with these situations and still keep going. Mm-hmm. It's worthy in itself. And so like being able to do that is such a tremendous thing. It's
basically we should all give ourselves a pat on the back. Right? It's like we all have our own problems, we all overcome them. So it's like, take a moment to realize that and actually realize the courage that's within you almost, I guess.
Yeah. And like he mentions this loads in his lectures and in his talks. It's like life is fucking difficult. The fact that we're even in a society that works, the fact that plumbing, electricity, all these things that can only come about from like a collective contribution, all these things have come about. And so it's amazing that we're even here. So be like thankful for that and make sure you be thankful for everything else that kind of occurs.
Yeah. We've lost our sense of gratitude almost, right?
Yeah.
It's like we're always focusing so much on these problems.
Yeah. And I think that's like from the whole book in general, that's my takeaway. First of all, the core is like try your hardest to like it. A lot of it is like build your self-dependency, build your self-worth by actually tackling problems, overcoming them, creating character.
Your goals, be specific. Be as specific as you can, basically.
Yeah.
With things like don't just go, I want to be fitter.
Yeah.
Or I want to have a girlfriend. That's not like, be more specific with things. Don't lie, or at least was it? Yeah, or don't. Was it tell the truth, or at least don't lie?
Yeah.
I think that's interesting. People could do with telling the truth more. Like if somebody just be like, you're not a bit like, as I said, I did with Will personally. It was like, I just tell the truth. I've started doing it in my life, mate, and I feel a lot better for it. It's almost like, I tell you what's interesting, when you withhold the truth, you do repress it, and it molds in your mind. Do you get me? I feel like this is a big thing. If you repress something, which you by instinct you have to do, or you should do, the repressed feeling actually makes you feel anxious, or like it makes you. I don't know how to explain it apart from the fact that you are conscious of it, and it remains conscious in your mind until you speak of it. It's like, why do people enjoy therapy? Because they get to speak of their problems, because they think most of the time that their friends aren't interested. And do you know what? If you ask people more like, what do you mean by that? I reckon they tell you more about their problems.
Yeah.
But the majority of us just go, how are you doing? Yeah, I'm good. How are you? And then if somebody just went, you don't sound that good, then they might open up.
Yeah.
But what happens if you just do the platitudes and then move on? They'll be like, he doesn't care. Interesting. It is interesting.
I think it's so interesting because like telling the truth is there's anxiety about telling it because you don't know how they're going to react, right? And it's like the honest you. But then the anxiety of not telling the truth, although it may be smaller and more tempting, that small anxiety builds up to more anxiety.
It builds up to resentment. It builds up to resentment as well. It builds up to resentment of like, why can't they? Because then you start acting out. You start doing like.
Well, this is it.
You start acting aggressively towards people. They're like, what's wrong? And then they still won't tell you.
So the anxiety of telling the truth is like a one thing. It's like a one amount of anxiety that comes with it. Whereas lying is continuous.
Yeah.
And like, so that small amount of anxiety builds up over time, which ends up being more than the actual anxiety of telling the truth. The other day, for example, I was trying to think up of an excuse why I didn't want to do a talk for one of my like research teams and to like one of my professors. And then I was like, you know what? Like, there's just no point in even lying, even though it's tempting.
Yeah, so you just told him you didn't want to do it. You just said, I didn't want to do it.
Well, no, I just said, like, I didn't want to do it right now because I'm busy and everything like that.
Ah, cool.
And I just didn't, like, the pressure there was like, he's going to see me as someone who's not very, like, got his shit together and all that kind of thing. And so that's the temptation, but it's like, it's not worth it.
That's interesting, actually. That's an interesting example. That's a good point. Like, you do it all the time, don't you? Like, if you say something, you'll be like, oh, I can just slightly bend it here to be in my favor, almost. That's it. Slightly bend it so they think better of me. Yeah. Anyway, mate, we'll call it there.
Yeah.
That was fun.
Sounds good.
Well, hopefully that piqued your curiosity, guys. After all, that's why we're here. If you'd like to know more about this book, head on over to our website, wisewords.blog. And if you have a particular book in mind you think we should review, send us a DM to our Instagram at wisewordsblog. Until next time, guys, have a good one.